No one expected this. In a room full of the world's most powerful billionaires, Elon Musk walked in. The air was thick with skepticism and quiet judgment. They thought they knew him, just another eccentric billionaire playing in the sandbox of tech and space. But then, something unexpected happened. Musk didn't try to fit in. He didn't play by their rules. He sat down, calm and collected, as the tension grew. And then he did the unthinkable. What happened next left the entire room in shock. Musk didn't just stand his ground. He completely destroyed everything they thought they knew about him. The room was electric, charged with anticipation. A room filled with the world's most influential billionaires, gathered for what was supposed to be a routine summit. This wasn't just any conference. It was a meeting of the minds who controlled the world's wealth, power, and industries. You had oil magnates who shaped global economies, tech titans who'd built empires from the ground up, and media moguls whose every word could change the course of history. Every person in this room had earned their place at the table. And yet, in the midst of all this power, there was one name on everyone's mind: Elon Musk. The name that made some chuckle, others squirm, and a few even sneer. The billionaires whispered among themselves, exchanging knowing looks. The stories about Musk, his crazy ideas, his strange tweets, his ambitions that seemed to stretch beyond the stars, had become legendary. But they all thought they had him figured out. He was just a tech genius, they told themselves, nothing more. Sure, he'd revolutionized electric cars, sent rockets to space, and even dreamed of colonizing Mars. But in their eyes, he was still just a wild card, an unpredictable player in a world that ran on rules. Rules they controlled. One billionaire leaned back in his chair, smirking. "He'll probably show up in one of those ridiculous jackets again," he said, his voice laced with mockery. Another billionaire, a media mogul who'd spent decades shaping public perception, nodded and laughed. "It's almost like he's begging for attention. A real businessman wouldn't act like that." But no one could deny that Musk had made his mark. Even as they dismissed him, his name continued to hang in the air, pulling their focus. The disruptor, the outsider. They all knew he was out there, challenging their world with ideas that didn't fit into their neat control boxes. As they sat back, comfortably wrapped in their wealth and influence, no one expected what would happen next. The door to the room opened, and in walked Elon Musk. No grand gestures, no showy entrance, just Musk, walking into the room as though he belonged there. He wasn't wearing a tailored suit or designer shoes like the others. Instead, he was dressed simply, just a black jacket and sneakers, as though he hadn't bothered to even try to impress. But the room fell silent the moment he stepped inside. It wasn't the kind of silence you'd expect from someone who'd just entered a room filled with strangers. It was the kind of silence that only comes when something big is about to happen. Musk didn't flinch as he took his seat at the table. He didn't look around for validation or approval. He wasn't here to impress anyone. And that's when the tension really began to rise. The billionaires exchanged uneasy glances, some confused, others visibly frustrated. Musk's very presence, his refusal to fit into their world, was a challenge. A challenge they weren't ready for. The stakes were high. These billionaires had built their empires with carefully calculated moves, playing by the rules of an old game. Musk was different. He was unpredictable. He didn't just follow the rules, he redefined them. And as they sat there, watching him, they knew something was about to change. The media mogul, trying to hide his discomfort, was the first to speak. "So, you're late," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're making quite the entrance." He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. The others chuckled lightly, trying to keep control of the room. But the unease remained. Musk didn't respond with a joke or a comment. He simply leaned back in his chair, relaxed but focused. "I don't think you invited me here to talk about my timing," he said, his voice calm, almost too calm for the moment. "I think you invited me because you've realized I'm going to change everything." The room fell still. No one spoke. The billionaires, who had spent their careers holding the reins of power, suddenly felt as though they were on the defensive. Musk wasn't here to play the same game. And that's when they all realized this was the moment they'd underestimated him. And then, out of nowhere, the shock of the century came. Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett, known for her fierce independence and sharp intellect, turned to Musk with a gaze that could cut through stone. "Mr. Musk," she said, her voice ringing out in the tense silence, "your behavior shows a troubling disregard for the rule of law." The billionaires gasped. This wasn't supposed to happen. Musk, the man who was always one step ahead, was now facing a direct challenge from one of the most powerful figures in the nation. The room, filled with the elite, the untouchable, was suddenly on edge. For a split second, it seemed like Musk might finally face the consequences of his defiance. That maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment where his streak of bold moves would crash down around him. But then, Musk did the unthinkable. What followed was a game-changing moment that no one in the room saw coming. The silence in the room stretched on, heavy and thick. As Musk took his seat, the billionaires around the table slowly regained their composure. But the unease never left the air. There was something about Musk, something that made them feel uncomfortable, as if he were an outsider in a world they had spent decades building and controlling. They were used to people who played by the rules, people they could easily predict and control. But Musk? He didn't play by the rules. And that was the problem. The first few moments were deceptively calm, but the tension was building, like the quiet before a storm. The billionaires exchanged looks, some of them shifting uncomfortably in their seats. They were trying to maintain their composure, trying to remind themselves that they were the ones with power, not him. But the more they looked at him, the more they felt that growing sense of urgency, a feeling that something was about to change, something they couldn't control. It wasn't just that Musk was sitting at the table with them. It was what he represented. He was a living, breathing disruption, a symbol of everything they feared. While they had built their empires with careful planning, stability, and an almost obsessive control over every detail, Musk had built his empire through chaos. He had taken risks, broken rules, and pushed boundaries. Tesla wasn't just a car company. It was a statement. SpaceX wasn't just about rockets. It was a vision of a future that no one else dared to dream of. And that made him dangerous. The group of billionaires may have mocked him behind his back, but they had all heard the whispers, the stories of his success, his drive, his almost terrifying ability to turn the impossible into reality. And deep down, despite all their bravado, they knew that Musk wasn't like them. He wasn't just playing the game, he was changing it. The media mogul, still trying to maintain some sense of control, was the first to speak. He cleared his throat and leaned forward, locking eyes with Musk. "You know," he said, a fake smile tugging at his lips, "we've all been following your little ventures. The electric cars, the rockets, the Mars nonsense." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "It's all impressive, I suppose. But let's be real for a second. Do you really think you're going to change the world that easily?" His tone was patronizing, dismissive, as if he were talking to a child who didn't understand how the real world worked. Musk didn't flinch. His expression remained calm, even bored. He had heard it all before. But the others in the room, those who had built their empires on media, on oil, on technology, felt a jolt of unease. The media mogul wasn't just a businessman. He was the businessman. His influence over public perception had shaped entire generations. He controlled narratives. He was the gatekeeper of truth. And now, he was standing in direct opposition to Musk, questioning not just his ideas, but his very legitimacy. Musk didn't respond right away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, as if sizing up the room, as if weighing his words carefully. His calm demeanor only made the tension grow. He wasn't in a rush. He didn't need to defend himself. He was the one with the vision, and he knew it. "Well," Musk said finally, his voice measured, "I'm not trying to change the world easily. But I don't think you understand what's happening right now. The world isn't changing because you're sitting here, discussing the same tired ideas over and over again. The world is changing because people like me aren't afraid to take risks. We're not afraid to do what others say is impossible. That's why Tesla exists. That's why SpaceX exists. And that's why I'm here." The room went still. Musk's words were simple, yet they hit harder than anything they had expected. The billionaires exchanged glances, some of them starting to squirm. They had all built their empires by being safe, by making sure they never put too much on the line. They had learned the art of risk management, playing within the boundaries that history had set. Musk, on the other hand, had thrived in chaos. And that's when the stakes truly began to settle in. This wasn't just a meeting between business titans. This wasn't just a conversation about ideas and innovation. This was a showdown between two worlds, the old world, where power came from control, and the new world, where power came from disruption. Musk wasn't here to play nice. He wasn't here to fit in. He was here to shake things up. And the billionaires in the room, each with their own massive stakes, each with their own carefully built empire, felt the weight of that realization. The comfortable world they had created, the world of steady growth and predictable returns, was under threat. And that's when they began to see Musk for what he truly was. Not just a rich man, not just a tech mogul, but a force of nature, a storm that couldn't be stopped. Another billionaire, an oil magnate known for his ruthless business practices, couldn't let the challenge go unanswered. "You think you could just waltz in here and change everything?" He spat, his voice rising with anger. "I've spent my life building this industry, shaping economies, creating jobs. And you think you can come in with your little toys and disrupt it all?" He was standing now, his voice loud, almost shaking with frustration. Musk remained seated, calm as ever. "You're right," he said, almost too casually. "I'm not here to fit in. I'm here to break things. And if that means your oil empire is next, then so be it." The words hit like a bombshell. The oil magnate's face reddened, but Musk didn't look away. He wasn't afraid of confrontation. In fact, he seemed to welcome it. The room was no longer just tense. It was electric, crackling with the kind of energy you feel right before a massive shift. The billionaires who had once laughed at Musk, dismissing him as a fool, were now starting to realize they had miscalculated. The stakes couldn't have been higher. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power, legacy, and control over the future. One by one, the billionaires began to shift in their seats, their smug confidence starting to crack. They had underestimated Musk for far too long. And now, they were about to find out just how costly that mistake would be. The room was on the edge of chaos, and no one knew what was coming next. But everyone could feel it. The storm was coming, and there was no stopping it. As the conversation intensified, it became clear that the billionaires weren't just talking about business anymore. They were talking about survival. Musk had made his mark, but they weren't going to let him walk away unchallenged. His calmness, his confidence, his ability to turn the tables had shifted the energy in the room. The billionaires, once full of bravado, were now on the defensive. They had underestimated him, and it was becoming more and more apparent that they didn't know how to deal with him. The oil magnate's face had turned an angry shade of red, his hands clenched into fists on the table. He wasn't going to let Musk continue with his brash remarks. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about respect. And to him, Musk had crossed a line. He couldn't let a tech billionaire walk into a room full of seasoned power players and talk down to them like this. "You think you're better than all of us, don't you?" The oil magnate's voice was tight, with barely contained fury. "You really believe you can come in here with your shiny cars and your space fantasies and change everything? Let me tell you something, Musk. The real world doesn't work the way you think it does. There's a reason the system is the way it is. We've built this world from the ground up." Musk didn't flinch. He simply leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. But there was a flicker in his eyes, a spark that was all too familiar to those who knew him. Musk wasn't afraid. Not of the oil magnate. Not of anyone in this room. And that's when the real battle began. "You're right," Musk said, his voice calm, almost serene. "The system is the way it is. But that doesn't mean it's right. The system is broken. And that's exactly why I'm here." There it was, Musk's quiet revelation. In that simple, understated statement, everything about him shifted. He wasn't just some eccentric billionaire trying to play with toys in space. He wasn't just a man who'd gotten lucky with a few high-profile successes. He was a visionary, someone who saw what others couldn't, and more importantly, someone who wasn't afraid to speak out against a system that was built to protect the status quo. For a moment, the room was silent. The billionaires who had been so quick to mock Musk, to dismiss him as a man with too many ideas and too little practicality, were now facing a stark truth. Musk wasn't just a wild card. He wasn't just an outlier. He was a threat, a real, tangible force that could challenge everything they stood for. But the oil magnate wasn't done. He had one more card to play. With a sneer, he turned to Musk, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're talking about changing the system," he said, leaning in, "but you have no idea what you're up against. You think the power you have in your little startup is anything compared to the networks we've built? You think a couple of electric cars and rockets are going to shift the balance of power? You're living in a fantasy world. Musk, you'll never even come close to the empire we've built." For a brief moment, Musk seemed to be considering the oil magnate's words. The room held its breath, expecting him to finally crack under the pressure. But then, Musk did something that stunned everyone. He smiled. Not an arrogant smile, not a mocking smile, but a knowing smile, one that seemed to carry with it a sense of understanding. He knew something that they didn't. He had something up his sleeve that none of them could predict. And that's when he finally spoke. "Let me tell you something about the empire you've built," Musk began, his voice steady. "You've built your empire on a foundation of fossil fuels, on a world that is dying. You've built your power by controlling something that's running out. The world is changing whether you like it or not. And the system you've built? It's built on sand. It's just a matter of time before it all collapses. That's the reality. I'm just the one who's willing to tell you the truth." The words hit like a punch. The billionaires shifted in their seats, their faces suddenly tense. The oil magnate's anger boiled over, but it was clear that something inside him had snapped. Musk had just undermined everything he stood for. He had attacked the very foundation of his empire, and he had done it calmly, without flinching. It was as if Musk had read his mind and knew exactly what buttons to push. But the real surprise came when Musk leaned forward, his voice dropping lower, as if he were revealing a secret. "You want to talk about power?" Musk said, his eyes locking with the oil magnates. "The power you have is temporary. The power I have is real. The power of technology, of innovation, of looking ahead to a future that's beyond the oil fields and coal mines. I'm not just talking about electric cars or rockets. I'm talking about something bigger. I'm talking about changing the way we think about the world. I'm talking about reshaping the future, not just managing the present." The oil magnate froze. There it was, the core of Musk's argument, the thing that made him a true threat to the billionaires in the room. Musk wasn't interested in maintaining the status quo. He wasn't interested in surviving in a broken system. He was in this for something far bigger. He was in this to change the world. The room went silent again, this time for an entirely different reason. Musk had just flipped the script. He wasn't the eccentric outsider they thought he was. He wasn't some naive dreamer. He was a man with a purpose, and that purpose was something they could no longer ignore. The billionaires were no longer just skeptical. They were rattled. They had underestimated Musk, and now they were seeing him for who he truly was, a man with vision, a man with strength, and a man who wasn't afraid to challenge the very foundation of their power. The media mogul, the oil magnate, and the others were starting to realize that Musk wasn't here to fit into their world. He wasn't here to play their game. He was here to win. And what made this moment even more dangerous was that Musk didn't need to prove anything to them. He didn't need their approval. He already knew where he was headed, and they were just along for the ride. In that moment, Elon Musk wasn't just a billionaire. He wasn't just an entrepreneur. He was the hero of his own story, and the billionaires in the room were about to find out just how game-changing that could be. The tension in the room was now palpable, like an electric current running through the air. Every billionaire at the table was on edge, their eyes locked on Musk, as if they were trying to figure him out, trying to predict his next move. Musk had already unsettled them, had already disrupted their carefully built sense of control, but the real battle was just beginning. It was clear now, this wasn't going to be an easy conversation. It wasn't going to be something that could be solved with a handshake or a polite exchange of ideas. This was a full-blown intellectual and emotional showdown, and the stakes were higher than ever. The room was divided, with the oil magnate still seething from Musk's earlier words, the media mogul now watching with cold, calculating eyes, and the others, some tech giants, some industrialists, sitting in uncomfortable silence. They had all heard Musk's ideas before in one form or another, but never in this context. Never like this. Never with such boldness and conviction. Musk wasn't asking for approval. He wasn't trying to get anyone to like him. He was here to prove something, and that something was far bigger than all of them. The oil magnate, desperate to regain control of the room, was the first to strike again. He leaned forward, his fists clenched, his voice dripping with condescension. You really think you can just reshape the world? That's what you're selling? A future where your little electric cars and rocket ships are going to change everything? That's fantasy, Musk. That's a fantasy you've sold to millions of people who don't know better. And now you're sitting here, trying to tell us that we've got it wrong. He paused, his eyes narrowing. You're delusional if you think your vision is anything more than a PR stunt. You're not a hero, Musk. You're a salesman. Musk's response was immediate, his voice calm but piercing. I'm not selling a fantasy, he said. I'm selling a future. A future where we don't rely on fossil fuels. A future where we stop destroying the planet. And a future where humanity isn't tied to a single planet, waiting for extinction. If that's delusion to you, then maybe it's time you open your eyes. The words hit like a hammer. The billionaires, who had once laughed at Musk's lofty goals, were no longer dismissing him so easily. They were on the defensive. The oil magnate, his face now a mix of anger and disbelief, was struggling to find a retort. But Musk wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. And you, Musk continued, turning to the media mogul, you've built your empire on controlling the narrative, on shaping people's minds. But the truth is, you don't control anything. Not anymore. The world doesn't need you to tell them what's important anymore. We got a new kind of power now. Power in ideas. Power in technology. And most importantly, power in truth. The media mogul's eyes flashed with irritation, but he kept his composure, trying to maintain the upper hand. He was used to being in control, used to being the one who held all the cards. But Musk's words were starting to land, and it was clear that the balance of power was shifting. I control more than you think, the media mogul said, his voice steely. I control perception. I control attention. And that's something you'll never understand. You think that because you've got a few successful companies, you've got it all figured out. But I've seen this before. New technologies come and go. And every time, the ones who disrupt things never last. They're swallowed up by the system eventually. Musk leaned in slightly, his gaze intense. You're wrong, he said, his voice low but filled with conviction. You can control attention. You can control perceptions. But you can't control progress. You can't control change. You're not in charge anymore. People are waking up, and they're ready to move forward without you. The room seemed to grow colder with each passing moment. The oil magnate, the media mogul. These men had built their empires through control, through mastery of the system. And now here was this one man, Elon Musk, sitting across from them, seemingly threatening to undo it all. What they didn't realize was that Musk wasn't fighting them directly. He wasn't fighting for control in the way they thought. He was fighting for something bigger, something more fundamental, the future. The silence in the room hung thick. No one dared speak for a moment. But then, the silence was broken by one of the tech billionaires, a quiet voice that had been sitting in the back of the room, observing everything. He had been part of the old guard, someone who had made his fortune in the traditional tech industry. But even he couldn't ignore the gravity of what Musk was saying. You're right, the tech billionaire said, looking around the room as if he were speaking to himself. We've been so focused on what's in front of us that we've forgotten to look ahead. We've built our empires on the idea that the world doesn't change, that if we just keep doing what we've always done, we'll keep winning. But maybe that's the problem. Maybe we've become complacent. Maybe we're the ones who are afraid of change. The room grew tense again as everyone turned to face the tech billionaire. His admission of complacency felt like a crack in the armor. He was one of them, the old guard, the people who thought they had everything figured out. But now he was questioning that certainty. Was it possible that Musk's vision wasn't just the ramblings of an eccentric billionaire? Was it possible that he was onto something? Something big. The oil magnate shot the tech billionaire a sharp look, but he said nothing. It was clear that Musk's words were starting to take root, and it was starting to bother him more than he cared to admit. And that's when the shift truly happened. Musk didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to yell or scream or try to force his ideas on anyone. He had done something more powerful. He had cracked their defenses. He had made them question everything they thought they knew. And it wasn't just the billionaires who were starting to feel it. Even the people watching from outside the room, the public, could sense the change. The way Musk had spoken so calmly, so confidently. He wasn't just selling a dream. He was selling a reality. The pressure was mounting. The billionaires who had once believed that their wealth and influence gave them the power to control everything were now beginning to see that maybe, just maybe, the world was moving in a direction they couldn't stop. The clock was ticking, and Musk had done what no one else had dared to do. He had made them realize that their empires, their carefully constructed systems of control, were fragile. That maybe, just maybe, they were the ones on the wrong side of history. Musk stood up from his seat, and the room went dead silent. He looked around, his gaze sweeping over the men who had built their fortunes on controlling the past. "I'm not here to negotiate with you," Musk said, his voice calm but full of finality. "I'm here to show you what's possible. Whether you like it or not, the future is already here, and it's not something you can control." The billionaires, once full of confidence, now found themselves staring at a future they didn't know how to handle. And with that, the true battle had begun. The room was on the verge of collapse. Tension had reached its peak, and the billionaires, who once controlled the world with their empires, were now visibly shaken. Musk had done the unthinkable. He had upended everything they had known, challenging not only their positions, but their very understanding of power. The air was thick with uncertainty, and every one of them had begun to question whether they had underestimated him. It was in this moment, as the billionaires wrestled with their thoughts, that the twist, the turning point, came. Musk, ever the unpredictable force, was ready to take it to the next level. He had already exposed their weaknesses, made them question their industries, and dismantled their fragile certainty. But now, he wasn't just talking about disruption anymore. He was going to show them. Musk remained calm as he stood, his eyes scanning the room. He knew the game had changed. It wasn't just about arguing anymore. It wasn't about convincing them with words. It was time to reveal his next move. He reached into his bag and pulled out a sleek, metal device, placing it onto the table in front of him. The billionaires leaned forward, their eyes narrowing. What was he doing? What was this new trick he had up his sleeve? With deliberate slowness, Musk pressed a button on the device. A series of holographic images flickered to life in the air above the table. One by one, the images displayed data, graphs, and futuristic designs, the kind of information they had never seen before. The audience gasped as they realized what they were witnessing. It was a blueprint for the future. Musk wasn't just talking about an idea anymore. He was showing them the next stage of evolution, a revolution in technology that had the potential to obliterate the current power structures they had spent decades building. First, he displayed an image of a new energy source, something clean, efficient, and nearly limitless. The oil magnate's eyes widened in disbelief as he saw what Musk was proposing. This wasn't just a competitor to oil. This was the end of fossil fuels as they knew it. This, Musk said, his voice steady but powerful, is the future of energy. It's not just a new energy source. It's the end of dependence on the very systems you've built your fortunes on. The future doesn't belong to oil. It belongs to clean, sustainable energy. The oil magnate's face turned a deep shade of red, but he said nothing. He was speechless, staring at the holographic images, unable to process what he was seeing. The foundation of his empire, built on the global dominance of fossil fuels, was suddenly threatened in a way he had never imagined. And this wasn't just some far-off concept. This was happening now. Next, Musk switched the display to another piece of technology that sent shockwaves through the room. A new type of electric car, one that far surpassed anything Tesla had ever created. It was sleek, efficient, and with features that no one had expected. Solar charging capabilities, quantum computing integrated into the driving system, and the ability to store and redistribute energy back into the grid. It was more than just a car. It was a new paradigm, one that could redefine how humanity moved and consumed energy. The tech billionaires, who had prided themselves on being at the cutting edge, were suddenly realizing they had been left behind. They had been so focused on incremental progress, on making small improvements to their existing products, that they had missed the bigger picture. Musk, in a single move, had not only surpassed them, but shown them that their entire vision of the future was outdated. They had been playing catch-up, while Musk had been thinking ahead, preparing for a world that didn't rely on their tired systems. But it wasn't just about energy or cars. Musk wasn't done. He tapped a few buttons on the device, and another image appeared. This one showing the development of Neuralink, his brain-computer interface project. The room went dead silent as the billionaires saw a demonstration of its potential. The ability to repair brain damage, enhance human cognition, and connect minds in ways that were once the stuff of science fiction. The media mogul, who had mocked Musk's crazy ideas earlier, sat back in his chair, stunned. He was a master of controlling information, the one who had shaped the narrative for decades. But here, in this moment, he realized that Musk wasn't just reshaping industries. He was reshaping what it meant to be human. He wasn't offering products or services. He was offering a new reality. Musk turned to face the room, his eyes glinting with a quiet confidence. "These are just the first steps," he said, his voice cool and calm. "But the world you've built, the world you've relied on, it's already obsolete. You're fighting against the inevitable. And the future doesn't care about your empires." The billionaires, once so full of pride, now seemed small in the face of Musk's revelation. They were used to being the ones in control. They were used to being the ones who held the keys to the future. But Musk had just shown them that their power was built on shifting sands, and the foundation of the future had already been laid in a way they never saw coming. There was a long pause as the room processed what had just happened. The oil magnate, the media mogul, the tech billionaires, they all sat in stunned silence. It was as though the rug had been pulled out from under them, and they were struggling to keep their footing. Musk had done it. He had turned the tables completely, not just by being smarter, but by being right. Then, something unexpected happened. The media mogul, his face pale and his voice trembling, broke the silence. "You really think you could just upend everything we've built?" he asked, his words barely more than a whisper. "You think you can just make all of this disappear?" Musk's response was simple, but it cut through the air like a blade. "Not disappear," he said, "just evolve. You see, the world isn't static. It's dynamic. And those who cling to the old ways are the ones who will be left behind." The room seemed to hold its breath as the billionaires absorbed the full weight of Musk's words. The system they had fought to preserve, the world they had spent decades building, they were powerless against the inevitability of change. They had underestimated Musk in every way, and now they were watching him not only destroy their preconceived notions, but offer them an alternative, a better future, a future they had no hand in creating. And just like that, Musk had made his final move. He had flipped the script. The very same billionaires who had scoffed at him, dismissed him, and mocked his ideas were now sitting in awe of the man who was changing the game. Musk had become more than just an outsider. He had become the architect of the future. The battle was over. Musk had won. But in doing so, he had shown them all something more important, that the future wasn't about wealth or power. It was about vision, about seeing beyond the walls of the present into a new, brighter tomorrow. And Musk had just proven that the future was his to shape. The room that had once been filled with sharp, competitive energy had now transformed into something different. It was quieter, heavier. The billionaires who had been so confident, so self-assured, just moments ago, now sat in stunned silence, processing the reality of what had just unfolded. The shift was undeniable. Elon Musk had not only held his ground, he had dominated the conversation, the room, and perhaps even the future itself. The power had changed hands. Musk stood tall, as calm as ever, his confidence radiating throughout the space. He had not just proven his vision, he had shown them the future. The billionaires who had once looked down on him dismissed him as a fool, a madman, or simply an eccentric entrepreneur, now realized that they had been wrong. They hadn't just underestimated his potential. They had underestimated the power of his vision. Musk had always been the outsider, the one who didn't play by the rules. But now, with his strategic reveal of his innovations, he had shown that his way of thinking wasn't just bold, it was necessary. The room was no longer divided. It wasn't a battle between ideas or philosophies anymore. The new reality was clear, and everyone knew it. The oil magnate, who had previously been at the center of the attack, was now visibly deflated. His face had lost its earlier red flush, replaced by a deep sense of defeat. He slumped in his chair, his fingers fiddling with his glass, unable to meet anyone's gaze. The mighty empire he had built on oil was now on the brink of collapse, exposed for its limitations and failures by a man who had far more than just a business strategy. Musk had shown him that his kingdom was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do about it. Across the room, the media mogul who had mocked Musk's ideas earlier now sat motionless, his usual sharp, calculating demeanor replaced by an expression of quiet disbelief. It was as though his mind couldn't catch up to what had just happened. He had made billions controlling information, controlling narratives, but now he was seeing firsthand that control could be lost just as easily as it was gained. Musk had taken control of the narrative, his narrative, and now the media mogul was scrambling to regain a hold of the story, but it was too late. One by one, the other billionaires, those who had sat in the background, silently observing the confrontation, started to shift uneasily in their seats. Their faces reflected the same shock and realization. They were witnessing a shift in the tides of power. It was clear that Musk had won the battle for the future. The technologies he had showcased, the ideas he had presented, had rendered their own business models outdated, irrelevant. The room felt like it was shrinking, as if the walls themselves were closing in on the billionaires. They had thought they were the ones who had mastered the game. But now, they were being forced to confront the truth. The rules had changed, and they weren't the ones setting them anymore. As the minutes passed, some of the billionaires tried to salvage their pride. A few attempted to regain control of the conversation, but their words felt hollow, almost desperate. They were fumbling, stumbling over their attempts to reassert themselves, but nothing they said could undo the damage. It was as if the room could sense that the tide had turned. The billionaire elite were no longer the dominant players. They had been dethroned. One of them, a well-known tech mogul, was the first to speak up, his voice strained. "Look, Musk, we get it. You got big ideas. But this whole thing, you think you can just replace everything? It's not that simple." His words were weak, defensive, as if he was trying to reframe the situation, trying to preserve his own dignity in the face of Musk's undeniable success. But Musk didn't flinch. He didn't need to respond aggressively. His calm demeanor and the weight of his ideas spoke louder than anything else. Musk simply nodded, his tone unwavering. "It's not about replacing everything," he said. "It's about making what we have better. It's about creating something that lasts. The world doesn't need the same tired ideas that have been driving it into the ground. What it needs is something new." The billionaires who had once laughed at Musk's ambitions now understood what they were facing. Not a competitor, but a force of nature. Musk wasn't just a visionary. He was a disruptor in every sense of the word. His ability to stay calm, to speak with conviction, and to present not just ideas but the actual future had shaken them to their core. He wasn't selling them a dream. He was showing them reality. The power dynamic had shifted completely. The room now seemed to orbit around Musk. Where the billionaires once held the reins, they now found themselves on the back foot, trying to catch up to someone who had already moved far ahead. Their positions, their influence, their wealth, they were no longer the measures of success. The future was being defined by vision, by innovation, and Musk had just proven that he was the one leading it. But what truly sealed Musk's dominance was his ability to stay unshaken in the face of opposition. Throughout the entire confrontation, he had been calm, poised, and strategic. He didn't raise his voice or act out in anger. He simply demonstrated that he had the power to change the world. And in doing so, he made the opposition seem weak, reactive, and out of touch. As the tension in the room lingered, a new reality set in. Musk wasn't just a disruptor. He wasn't just a visionary. He was right. He had won not through force, not through manipulation, but through the undeniable truth of his ideas. The billionaires who had once controlled the narrative, the industries, and the future were now on the outside looking in. The room began to empty slowly, as one by one, the billionaires left. Some walked out with their heads down, defeated. Others exchanged glances, knowing that they had just witnessed something monumental, a shift in power that they could never reverse. But no one said anything. No one dared to confront Musk. The silence was deafening, and with each step that echoed on the marble floor, the reality of Musk's victory became more and more undeniable. Elon Musk had walked into a room full of billionaires who had thought they owned the world. And by the time he walked out, he had not only dismantled their empires, but had shown them that the future wasn't theirs to control. It was his. Musk's victory was now complete, and as the final few billionaires trickled out of the room, one thing was clear: the world was watching. The era of the old guard was over. The age of Musk had begun. As Elon Musk walked out of the room, the quiet buzz of conversations resumed, but the air had changed. The billionaires who had once held all the power, who had dictated the direction of industries, economies, and technologies, now found themselves questioning everything they had believed about success and influence. The world outside the doors of that exclusive summit was about to change, and it was clear that Musk had just set the stage for a new era. It didn't take long for news of Musk's bold move to spread. What had started as a private meeting soon became the talk of every news outlet, every social media platform, and every boardroom across the world. Headlines screamed, "Elon Musk destroys the billionaire elite. Musk's vision shakes the foundations of power, and the future is Musk's to shape." But the story wasn't just about Musk anymore. It was about what his ideas represented, what his actions had symbolized. It was about a broader shift in how we viewed power, influence, and progress. The media, once so quick to question Musk's methods and motives, now found themselves forced to reconsider their narrative. Journalists who had previously painted him as an eccentric billionaire with grand, impossible dreams were now trying to keep up with a rapidly changing reality. They were no longer just covering Musk's latest tweet or product launch. They were tracking his every move, hanging on his every word, trying to understand the vision that had just upended everything they knew. But it wasn't just the media that felt the shift. Musk's confrontation with the billionaire elite resonated with millions of people around the world. Ordinary individuals, from young tech enthusiasts to the everyday worker, began to see Musk in a new light. He wasn't just a businessman or an inventor. He was a symbol of possibility. Musk had shown them that it was possible to challenge the status quo, to push against the powerful forces that had dominated the world for so long. People saw a man who didn't follow the rules, a man who believed that the future wasn't shaped by the past, but by those brave enough to imagine something better. They saw someone who didn't just talk about change, he was actively creating it. The idea that one person could challenge the entrenched systems of power and change the world felt more tangible than ever before. On social media, a wave of support began to build around Musk's ideas. Hashtags like #MuskIsRight and #FutureNow began trending worldwide. People who had previously doubted him were now rallying behind him, sharing their own visions for a better world. Musk had not only proven his point, he had sparked a movement. The impact was immediate and it spread like wildfire. It wasn't just the public who noticed. Governments, organizations, and institutions that had once viewed Musk as an outsider began to reevaluate his influence. Politicians who had been hesitant to engage with him now saw an opportunity to tap into his vision of the future. Major corporations, who had once tried to bury or dismiss his ideas, began to pay attention. In boardrooms across the world, the question was no longer, "What's the next step for our company?" It was, "How do we adapt to a world that Musk is building?" Musk had disrupted more than just the billionaires in that room. He had disrupted the very framework of how the world operated. The era of old money, of control by a few powerful elites, was being replaced by a new age of innovation, vision, and progress. The tide had shifted, and the future was no longer about who had the most money. It was about who had the most foresight. In the aftermath of that fateful meeting, as Musk continued to push forward with his projects, SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink, and beyond, the impact on society was profound. Renewable energy, space exploration, and artificial intelligence became not just futuristic concepts, but immediate goals that could shape the world for generations to come. The way we thought about business, about technology, and about the very future of humanity was transformed. Musk's victory over the billionaire elite was a win for the dreamers, the innovators, and the outsiders. It was a victory for those who dared to see a world that others couldn't or wouldn't imagine. The conflict had revealed something bigger than just the clash of egos. It had revealed the power of vision. Musk wasn't just a businessman, he was a force of nature. And in that moment, the world saw that the true power didn't belong to those who had accumulated wealth, but to those who had the ability to shape the future. As the weeks passed, the conversation shifted. No longer was Musk seen merely as a disruptor. He was regarded as a pioneer, a trailblazer. What had seemed impossible, colonizing Mars, transitioning to sustainable energy, connecting human brains to computers, now felt within reach. Musk had demonstrated that with the right mindset, the right vision, and the courage to stand up to the most powerful figures in the world, anything was possible. But perhaps the most important takeaway from that moment, the one that would linger in the minds of millions, was this: the future isn't controlled by the old guard. The future belongs to those who think differently, who dare to challenge the way things are, and who have the courage to pursue what others deem impossible. The closing moment of the summit, when Musk had walked out calmly, leaving behind a room full of defeated billionaires, would become iconic in the years to come. It wasn't just a victory for Musk, it was a victory for everyone who ever believed that the world could be different. It was a reminder that real power lies not in money, but in ideas, and that, in the end, the future is not shaped by those who cling to the past, but by those who dare to imagine a new world. And as Musk's vision unfolded in the years that followed, the question that lingered in the air was this: if one person could change the world so dramatically, what could happen if we all started thinking beyond the limits of what we've been told is possible? The story of that fateful encounter was more than just the tale of a billionaire's rise to dominance. It was the story of a shift in power, a challenge to the status quo, and a clear message to the world. The future isn't owned by the richest. It's owned by the ones who dare to change it.